Hello and welcome to the Assembly for Monday the 22nd of November 2021. This week's Assembly is presented by me, Mrs Watson, and through this Assembly we will explore our core values of challenge, learn and respect. We're going to explore two topics today, the first of these being peer-on-peer abuse. I'd like you to think about what these statistics might be referring to in terms of peer-on-peer abuse. 1 in 3, 1 in 4 and 1 in 5. We'll be coming back to those statistics later in this Assembly. So in this Assembly, we're going to consider what is peer-on-peer abuse, what are some statistics on peer-on-peer abuse, are these examples of peer-on-peer abuse when we look at some scenarios, what is the impact of peer-on-peer abuse, and what can be done about peer-on-peer abuse. So what is it? Peer-on-peer abuse is a form of abuse that occurs when there is any kind of physical, sexual, emotional or financial abuse or coercive control exercised between children. It includes bullying, cyberbullying, sexual violence and harassment and sexting. So abuse is violent or the cruel treatment of someone. Coercive means using force to persuade people to do something they're unwilling to do. And harassment is behaviour towards someone that is threatening or that annoys or upsets them. Peer abuse facts. 1 in 3 girls have experienced sexual violence from a partner before they turn 18 years old. 1 in 4 young people in the UK have been victims of bullying in the past 12 months. At least 1 in 7 are sending texts. And 1 in 5, that's 19% of children between 10 and 15, experience cyberbullying. So is this scenario peer-on-peer abuse? On the way home, Sadia sits on the top deck. Alicia sometimes speaks with her friends and comments on the way Sadia looks, calling her ugly and weirdo. She doesn't think Sadia can hear. Now, in this case, it's certainly unkind and not very nice conversation to be having about anybody that's unpleasant. But the fact that Alicia doesn't realise that Sadia is overhearing her means that she's not being directly abusive. Consider the conversations that you have with others and always try to be kind. If this was direct, it would be peer-on-peer abuse. Sadia should stop this and Alicia should speak up to a trusted adult so the conversation can be had to prevent these conversations from happening. This example, we've got messages here from Amy, and she's upset that Fred has posted one of her private messages publicly. It seems that Amy and Fred are friends, but you can see here that Amy is not going to speak up and let Fred know that he has done something that has made her feel embarrassed and uncomfortable. If this continued though, and Fred continued to post things unpleasantly and share Amy's messages, it would be harassment and would therefore be peer-on-peer abuse. And our final scenario, Joseph is in year 9. He knows Billy in year 10. Billy often asks Joseph to buy him his lunch at school. Joseph doesn't want to say no, as Billy has lots of friends and he's worried that he will be called names or worse if he doesn't. In this case, this is coercive. Billy is very likely to know that he has some power over Joseph and being the year below, and he's using that power to coerce Billy into buying him food. So in this case, this is a definite example of peer-on-peer abuse. So what's the impact? Peer-on-peer abuse can obviously result in physical injuries if there's physical bullying occurring. It can lead to those people that are being abused to seek out drugs and alcohol as a method of coping, a bad way of coping with these things. People might go missing or run away to avoid the situation and put themselves at further risk. There are definite effects on the mental health and emotional well-being of those that are victims. It can cause these people to be disengaged from their school and learning, and in some cases, where the students are coerced into committing criminal offences through the coercion of others, can be another impact. So what should we do? We need to ensure that everyone is aware of what peer-on-peer abuse is. Everyone in the school should behave in line with the school behaviour policy, and you should know that we will deal with peer-on-peer abuse when we are aware that it's occurring or we're witness to it. If you have any concerns about yourself or others, you need to report it. The underlying rule here is that we treat everyone in our school with respect, and if we do that, this will minimise these sort of situations occurring. So how can you report? If you're worried and you need to talk, you can come and speak to any of the safeguarding team. That's myself, Mrs Watson, Mrs Mears, Mrs Anderson, Mrs Curd or Mr Sindrak. Speak to another trusted adult and they can help you get support from one of us. You can also email stop@meridianhigh.london. In addition, remember last week I have put a Google form for you to report concerns via Google Classroom. There is an anonymous and a reporting system that will collect your email address so we know to come to you immediately if you raise a concern with us. And you can find the reported concerns here in your Google Classroom. It should be near the top of your screen when you go into your tutor room. Right, moving on to the news this week. Lockdowns across Europe. After cases of COVID-19 have risen sharply across Europe in the past few weeks, lots of countries such as Austria and the Netherlands are facing further new restrictions. And you will see that in the news over the weekend, we are also going back into having to wear masks on public transport. Free school meals for all in Wales. The two biggest political parties in Wales have struck a deal, which means that all children aged between 4 and 11 will be able to get free school meals within the next 3 years. A menu of treatments. New advice from experts suggests that people in England with mild depression should be offered a range of treatments before being prescribed medication. And Brits switch things up. The Brit Awards have announced that the separate male and female award categories are being scrapped. Artists will just be celebrated just for their music instead. So our other topic this week, on Friday, it is the International Day of People with Disabilities. So what rights are there for people with disabilities? This is the time to celebrate the people in our communities and beyond who live with a disability. The theme of this year is all about fighting for disability rights in a post-COVID era. People with disabilities are described as the world's largest minority. What do you think this means? And do you think this is reflected in our society? Did you know that 1 in 7 people around the world have a disability? But what does this actually mean? A disability is when someone has a physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory condition that makes it difficult for them to participate in society in the same way as other people. A physical disability is to do with how our bodies work, a mental disability is to do with how our brains and thoughts work, an intellectual disability is to do with how we learn and understand, and a sensory disability is to do with how our senses, sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch work. Around the world, over 1 billion people have some form of disability. Thumbs up now if you think this fact is true, thumbs down if you think it's false. This is true. Is this more or fewer people than you would have expected? Remember, the population of the world is over 7 billion people. All countries in the world have signed an agreement on the rights of people with disabilities. Do you think this is true or false? Remember, rights are things that all people should have, like the right to an education. This is false. Only 164 countries in the world have signed this agreement. What kind of information do you think is in this special agreement? Its official name is the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Around the world, disability affects approximately 1 in every 20 children. Thumbs up if you think this is true, thumbs down if you think this is false. It is 1 in 10, so this is false. This means that at least 100 million children worldwide live with a disability. Do you think disabilities are discussed enough? The coronavirus pandemic has made life more difficult for people living with disabilities. Thumbs up if you think this is true, thumbs down if you think this is false. This is true. Why do you think this might be the case? In your session tomorrow, we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail. In the UK, 1 in 3 people have a disability feel there is a significant disability prejudice. Thumbs up if you think this is true, thumbs down if you think this is false. And a prejudice is an unfair opinion or feeling, especially that is made without enough knowledge. This is true. This number has got bigger in the last few years. What could be done to make fewer people feel this way? So earlier you heard that lots of nations have signed the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Can you think of any rights that all people around the world have? You also saw earlier that life for people with disabilities has been much more difficult because of the coronavirus pandemic, and this has affected some of these rights. You're now going to learn about some of the rights that people are fighting for as part of this year's International Day of People with Disabilities. So for healthcare, people with disabilities have the right to the highest available standard of health. That's what they're fighting for. They're fighting for people with disabilities to have equal rights to work and gain a living, for states to guarantee equal access to primary and secondary education, for countries to guarantee that people with disabilities can take part in mainstream and disability-specific sports, for states to guarantee that persons with disabilities can access their environmental surroundings easily, And a final reflection, what do you think you can do to make sure that people with disabilities in your community feel supported and heard? So tomorrow you will be discussing, has the pandemic made us more aware of disabilities? Some views here to get you thinking. The signs, guidelines and restrictions have given us some insight into living with a disability. There is more discussion about different kinds of disabilities like hidden disabilities. Being inside more has meant we might not see people with disabilities as much and are less aware. During lockdown, we may have been more aware of disabilities, but it seems unlikely this will last. So at the end of the session tomorrow, don't forget to vote with your tutor group and share your views on Google Classroom. Thank you for listening to this week's assembly.